Hey guys, this is Nick. Welcome to Strange Spotting. Has any of you ever seen this footage? It's a segment from episode 1, season 2 of the TV show Mountain Monsters, which aired on April 4, 2014 on the Destination America cable channel. I've only bumped into it recently and my strangeness radar went haywire. I will analyze the footage in the present video, and if you stick around till the end, I'll give you an informed opinion about what exactly the Kentucky farmer captured on camera. The cryptozoology-themed reality TV show Mountain Monsters aired for 5 seasons on the Warner Bros. Discovery Network's channel Destination America between 2013 and 2017. It later moved to the Travel Channel, owned by the same network, for 3 more seasons, for a total of 8 seasons and 79 episodes. A special episode was produced and released in 2021 to commemorate team leader John Trapper Tice, who passed away in 2019, and a 9th season has been announced. The show entailed a team of cryptozoology researchers hunting a different undiscovered creature in each episode by setting traps and placing trail cameras and infrared camera nearby to capture photographic evidence. The episode in question, titled Kentucky Hellhound of Pike County, was the first episode of the 2nd season and aired for the first time on April 4, 2014. At the outset, the team is contacted by some farmers in Pike County, Kentucky, who report their livestock being attacked and brutally killed by a canine creature that closely resembles a local legend dating back to 1939. Many people treat the show simply as good fun, comprised of staged events and a colorful cast of characters. But despite the general tone and conventional tropes of reality TV, if we assume for a moment that unknown creatures do exist, it's only logical to think that these guys came across them on at least a few occasions. What makes this particular episode worthy of investigation is that among the farmers they meet with, one guy named Drew provides alleged footage of the Hellhound. The features of the subject in the footage, the fact that Kentucky is one of the states with most Dogman sightings and reports, the very rich and unsettling local folklore regarding this creature, and the relatively close geographical proximity of Pike County to one of the biggest Dogman hotspots, the Daniel Boone National Forest, are enough reasons for me to entertain the possibility that this could be a genuine dogman caught on camera. Most people with an interest in cryptozoology and paranormal are familiar with the general description of the cryptid, but I still think I should spend a few words on it. The dogman is reportedly similar in appearance to the werewolf archetype we've all been exposed to through Hollywood movies, video games and visual media of all kinds, but it's conceptually different because it's a creature in and of itself, not a human affected by a transmissible disease who transforms under the influence of the full moon into a hybrid of human and wolf. The depth of an intercultural pervasiveness of legends regarding this creature throughout human history has led some to theorize that the myth of the werewolf could be actually based on an existing animal that the modern world has never caught up with. Unfortunately, while the fossil record and constantly expanding tree of human evolution make the concept of a relic hominid like Bigfoot not too far-fetched, there is currently no evidence whatsoever of canids evolving into a bipedal stance and into sentient beings. As a consequence, the dogman is even more ridiculed by hardcore skeptics than its ape-like cousin, and no reputable scientist would ever touch the subject with a 10-foot pole. To be fair, even many Bigfoot believers and eyewitnesses display strong skepticism towards this outlandish creature, until they come across one, that is. The number of people reporting encounters with these things is absolutely mind-boggling, and the perceivable psychological repercussions of said encounters in the voices of the hundreds of interviewees I've heard so far so compelling that I find the notion of all of them being lies or misidentifications rationally untenable. I believe people around North America Central and South America, and surprisingly, in the UK and East Europe, are seeing something real. I don't know yet what these things are, and there's no lack of supernatural, alien, or interdimensional speculation thrown around, which I can neither fully discount nor embrace without the needed evidence. All I can do is look at what is available, and that's exactly what I'm going to do with this video. The most common thought process in approaching this clip would be to assume that since the entire show is fake, the footage was concocted by the production and is therefore fake as well. At least that's the conclusion people with a prejudice towards the show would arrive to, but a biased assumption could only increase the odds of an incorrect conclusion. What we're looking at presents four distinct possibilities. Number 1, the producers of Mountain Monsters faked the video. Number 2, Drew, the farmer who recorded the video, is hoaxing the production. Number 3, the subject in the footage is a misidentified known animal. Number 4, the subject in the footage is an unknown animal. For the first two, we can dismiss the AI-generated video right away because there was no commercially available generative AI software in existence in 2014. The first algorithm for adversarial networks was created for the first time in that exact year, 2014. By the American computer scientist Ian Goodfellow. The other essential ingredients of the generative AI cocktail, so to speak, diffusion models and the transformer architectural model, were respectively created in 2015 and 2017. There is zero probability that a software could have generated video from scratch in 2014. All we are left with is what follows: VFX compositing, which would have required the creation, rigging and texturing of a 3D model and the compositing of said model performing a set of actions with a real environment. An entirely digital scene and creature created and rendered in a workflow involving more than one computer program, or one or two individuals wearing a costume and convincingly emulating the mechanics of a fully or partially quadrupedal animal. As usual, I will proceed to analyze the details in the footage to single out the most likely explanation among the 5 possibilities, to which I will assign an equal probability at the beginning of the analysis. I will leave any speculation regarding hoaxing responsibilities or the nature of the beast for the end of the video, after we've established which one is the most plausible explanation. There is a quick answer to the theory that this could be an entire CGI scene, and it is the fact that during the Mountain Monsters episode the team goes to the shed to measure the creature's height. Of course, someone could argue that the location was digitally recreated, so let's look at the scene. For the remainder of the video, I'll avail myself both of the original clip and of a highly enhanced version I've purposely prepared. There is an argument to be made about the capability of CGI in 2014 being somewhat lower than it is today, but regardless, this environment looks too varied, detailed, and random to me to be CGI. Look for instance at these colored little things on the ground, perhaps pieces of paper. Look at the bark on the tree trunk, which is either discoloration of some kind or moss. How run down the shed is, how many different types of grass on the ground, and how different the trees are from each other. Most CGI environments are procedurally generated, which means the software involved uses fractal-based patterns to create vegetation or other details. A good rule of thumb is that through this process, all the trees and leaves and grass have tiny differences but look homogeneous overall. Also, the lighting is too realistic to be digitally created. I don't see any objective reason to support the CGI scene hypothesis, and therefore I'm going to dismiss it entirely. There are mainly 7 perceivable aspects that can indicate if a scene or a subject were created with CGI: lighting, color, texture, perspective, movement, interaction, and borders. Each of them must be looked at for inconsistencies and anomalies, which for obvious reasons are liable to be more conspicuous in video footage than in a still image. Let's begin with lighting. In the original footage, it's hard to tell if the alleged creature's lighting, or more appropriately lack thereof, is consistent with the surroundings, but the enhanced version can provide more details as well as a higher degree of certainty. I can detect any inconsistency between the environment and creature's illumination, even with the exposure and luminosity cranked up to very high levels. It seems the only very dim light hitting the creature's body is coming from above, and I would say it's secondary light due to air refraction. The second aspect to consider is color. Are a bit less significant than lighting. It's worth noting that CGI colors tend to be flashy, more vivid than those of a real environment. That's not the case with our Hellhound, because in the original footage there's no color to detect to begin with, and in the enhanced version there is a very faint but visible blue tint, which is a detail often mentioned in Dogman eyewitnesses, by the way. Moving on to texture, the telltale signs would be either the creature's texture looking too perfect or sudden changes in details. I watched the footage many times over a time span of a few weeks and have not been able to notice any of the two clues I've just mentioned. And the same goes for perspective. There is no detectable shift in perspective, which would be another clue of a CGI subject composited into a real environment. A very noticeable detail that makes me doubt this animal is CGI is the fact that Drew, if we assume he really was the one recording, is understandably not able to keep a steady hand, and the camera vibrations had no effect on the animal, which is perfectly anchored to the environment in terms of Newtonian physics, if you will. This pertains both to perspective and movement, and the way the creature moves is very fluid and realistic, which means there is no clue of CGI in this element either. All we're left with are interaction and borders. I've looked far and wide for any clear sign of the animal visibly touching and moving the wood on the shed, some small branch around its body, or the grass on the ground, but I couldn't find any. So the interaction aspect neither proves or disproves CGI. On the other hand, I've explored every single pixel of the creature's borders, both in the original and on the enhanced footage, and there's no clear demarcation. The creature is perfectly fused with the surroundings. At this point, we have 6 out of 7 aspects examined that indicate this is not CGI, and 1 that is to be considered neutral in that regard. This means I cannot rule out the hypothesis entirely, but the probabilities of this creature being generated through computation are essentially negligible, which leaves us with one question: what is this physical entity? The size of the subject under scrutiny can play a big role in ruling out animal species it cannot belong to, and also in figuring out whether the costume hypothesis holds any water. Luckily, this time part of the work was done by someone else. In the episode, the Mountain Monsters team goes to the shed, and based on the fact that the creature's back either touches or is extremely close to this horizontal plank's lower border, takes a measurement of 49 inches from the floor to said lower border and estimates the creature to be 4 feet to the shoulders, or 145 centimeters. Then they proceed to measure the distance between the plank and the nearby tree and estimate the creature's length at 7.5 feet, equal to 229 centimeters. I would like you to bear in mind the sequence of logical steps until now. I have given you objective reasons as to why, in the footage under scrutiny, the setting is real and the subject is almost certainly not a digital creation. What we see in Drew's clip is a physical entity, and there's no reason to doubt the team's measurements, because we get to see Trapper standing next to the shed, and according to his internet bio, he was 6 feet 1 inch tall. The wooden plank in question is almost at his shoulders. If anything, I would say 4 feet is correct as a ballpark, but given that the creature slightly bends its front and back legs when stepping off the shed, it could be even 2 or 3 inches taller than what they estimated. On the other hand, I'm not too sure about their length measurement, because they are using the middle of this tree as the end point, but the creature's body doesn't reach that point. and a plank at the same time in any frame, so I'm gonna go with my more conservative estimate of 6.4 feet, equal to 195 centimeters, which is still impressive, and together with the shoulder height, enough to disprove the costume hypothesis entirely. I am 188 centimeters tall, equal to 6.168 feet. I've measured my shoulder height at 81 centimeters while on all fours, which equals to 2.66 feet. Here's a silhouette representing yours truly, resized to a height of 243 pixels at the shoulder, which according to a simple calculation that you see here is a correct proportion, and positioned to make my rear end coincide with the creature's. Do you see the problem? There is zero possibility for this to be a person in a costume because the overall size is too far off in height and in length. It would require roughly 2 individuals to reach a similar length but not the same height, and there is no way to fit the entirety of 2 human bodies in here, because there is no possible way to accommodate 8 limbs and move as quickly and fluidly as the creature moves in the footage. The logical consequence is that the costume hypothesis must be disposed of. So, if this is not CGI, and it's not 1 or 2 humans in a costume, then what the heck is it? The first, broadest inference is that this is something made of flesh, bones and blood, a biological entity, in other words, and the most acceptable theory would be a known animal that we are somehow misidentifying. The problem is we already have a pretty good estimate of its dimensions, and we see its general shape, body and movement quite well in the enhanced footage. The logical steps verified in our investigation up until now imply also that the shape and movement are real, and even if we don't get to see more details about the creature's face or its front and back paws, what we have is more than enough to compare it with known animals and perhaps pinpoint a plausible culprit. But before we do that, I'd like to ask you for a small favor. If you've enjoyed this video so far, it would really help me to make more if you could push the like button and share it on a digital platform of your choice. I am very committed to making high quality, serious investigations on the paranormal and on cryptozoology, and if that's something you are interested in, you could consider subscribing to the channel and leaving on the notifications to avoid missing any of those. Alright, back to the matter at hand. There are, in my opinion, only 6 wild animals to consider in this case in terms of size and locomotion: deer, elk, feral hogs, black bear, mountain lion and wolf. Only 3 of these are recognized by the local Fish and Wildlife Department to be indigenous to Kentucky. Deer and elk are abundant in the bluegrass state, while black bears have made a spontaneous comeback in recent years after being essentially eliminated by the beginning of the 20th century. Wild pigs, or feral hogs, are not technically a native species and are not to be confused with boars, but there are plenty of them in Kentucky as anywhere else, given their classification as an invasive species. There is currently no evidence of mountain lions in the state, but since they've been sighted by many on the Appalachians in general, I suppose it's not too much of a stretch to imagine that one could have wandered as far down as Kentucky. As for wolves, there have been no gray or red wolves in this state for a century. They've both been declared extinct. But for the purpose of this video, I will entertain the idea that this could be an escaped wolf. I've taken some silhouettes of each animal and resized them to match the largest known height for each in proportion to the measurements of the alleged hellhound. I'll show them in succession and feel free to pause for each. White-tailed deer, elk, black bear, wild pig, cougar, and gray wolf. These comparisons reveal that the animal in the footage does not fit any known category. It's roughly as big as the biggest known deer, almost as big as the biggest known elk, bigger than the biggest black bear, almost twice the biggest wild pig, shorter but taller than the biggest cougar, and roughly 50% bigger than the biggest gray wolf. We are comparing it with the higher end of the range for each species, mind you. So the only possible conclusion is that this thing is enormous. Anomalies happen in the animal kingdom, but to have such anomalies, you need very big populations for genetics to do the magic, and that's not the case with cougars or grey wolves. As for the possibility of this being a stray dog, which I bet many of you had in mind, I should point out that the tallest breeds are the Great Dane and the Irish Wolfhound, which get as tall as 32 inches, roughly 33% smaller than our Hellhound. The most mind-boggling aspect, though, is that the shape of this animal is not even close to any of the species mentioned so far. If we were to pick one it bears a slight resemblance to, it would be a grey wolf. And I think we can agree on this animal displaying canine characteristics, but calling it an oversized wolf would be grossly inaccurate. At this point, we can abandon misidentified known animal hypothesis, and we are left with 1% probability of this being CGI and 99% probability of this being an unknown animal. But before the conclusion, we must look at some astounding details of the morphology. The question remains unanswered. We know what this thing is not, but what is it exactly? I have thought quite a bit about a Hellhound of Pike County legend, and now I feel confident in saying that it is not an old wives' tale. When moonshiners in 1934 and other eyewitnesses along the following years reported seeing something out of a nightmare, they were saying the truth. The Hellhound exists, and although this will not vindicate those who were ridiculed and scorned, it is enough to warn people not to go into the woods alone or unarmed, or worst of all, both. We don't know what this animal is capable of, and given that there are hundreds of unsolved missing people cases in Kentucky as of today, I think it's conceivable that the species this creature belongs to might be responsible for some of those disappearances. The roster of alleged cryptids in America is just too big not to accommodate a gigantic four-legged canine creature, but I strongly suspect that the Kentucky Hellhound is not a quadruped, at least not uniquely. Two morphological details in particular make me think we are in fact looking at none other than a dogman. I will leave a deeper investigation for a future video, but this very pronounced kyphosis or convex curvature of the creature's back makes me think that its spine and skeleton can sustain bipedalism, and that the front paws are in fact arms. And the strange shape of the lower back legs, coupled with the conspicuous back end, suggest this thing can stand up like higher primates and humans. In conclusion, I consider the Hellhound clip from Mountain Monsters Season 2 Episode 2 extremely compelling evidence of the existence of an unknown and as of today undetected by science, enormous and highly dangerous species of canine inhabiting the forests of Kentucky and perhaps many other areas of the North American continent. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I look forward to reading your thoughts in the comment section. Thank you so much for watching. I wish you all a fabulous day, and I'll see you in the next one.